Well, here we are again. I'm staring at the screen, so obviously my eyes are going to be a little off. Whatever. Yeah. So I was just thinking about this, and again, I don't have a morbid fascination with all this, but it's still very fascinating as to how we come to be as people, and where our paths and our choices in life take us, and how traumas can and addictions can shape our lives and our psyches. So like there's a famous example for traumatic brain injuries, and that's Phineas Gage. That's spelled Phineas. Gage is Gage. Gage. Yeah. And so I'm looking at the Wikipedia article here, and Wikipedia is a good starting point for research, but it's not comprehensive. It's not holistic. You got to remember that this is peer edited, so there's a lot of fighting going on in the background as to what different definitions are and how it's relevant to the culture. And there's a lot of fights over different people in academia as to what is what, as I was just saying. So it's it's not 100% accurate. That's what my teachers taught me when we were studying this, and Wikipedia started coming to being. Early in the aughts, as it was starting, it was newfangled, brand new, and then of course, I've had my experience with JSTOR. I don't have access to that anymore because it's behind a paywall now. And there's the resources with Google Research Google or whatever it is, to further whatever curiosity that you have. And so considering that, so what is it, the other stuff that I've learned recently and reminded myself of is that there's this idea that the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath is that a psychopath is born and that a sociopath is made. Because the psychopathic person doesn't have the same amount of development in a certain area of the brain. If I remember correctly, it's the amygdala. Go ahead and feel free to correct me. Um, but it's the area of the brain that's responsible for. So it goes here for emotions, and so yeah. So like you have different layers of the brain. Okay, so look this up. Brain construction. So if you look at the brain in plain view, let's see. So you have different layers, and the one example I'm using is going to simplified one. It's through Google. So cingulate cerebral cortex, parietal lobe, thalamus, occipital lobe at the back, the midbrain and the stem, the cerebellum in the brain stem itself, the spinal cord, the medulla, the pons, pituitary gland, hypothalamus, corpus callosum. And what you don't necessarily learn is that, well, unless you have a brain in front of you, is that the center of the brain between the lobes, so the corpus callosum connects the two lobes, and there's a part of it that's actually hollow. And so, by my theory, or at least by some other people's theories, it's hollow for a reason. It's a resonance chamber. It allows for, different functions for which are not immediately communicated amongst the public. For whatever reason, because either it's a trade secret or something like that. But in the age of information, we can't be having this. It doesn't make any sense. So what happens is with these psychopathic people is that they, again, as I was saying, they have an underdeveloped part of the brain from birth, and so there's different reasons for that, different influences. So you have environmental influence, you have hormonal, which is correlated to hormonal influences. Again, I'm just trying to being an amateur here. I don't know everything. Uh, and so how that correlates to Phineas Gage is that traumatic brain injuries can also lead to psychopathic tendencies. It's not necessarily the person's fault, right? You can't blame the person for having these tendencies, and they have to be treated differently. And so, like the thing that is the way it's treated in the media is that these people are always evil, but this isn't the case, and they don't deserve that. It's just like how any other disability should be treated. Because if you think about all of these sports players that have concussions, like consecutive concussions, and the brain bruising and so on and so forth, or brain bleeds and strokes and whatnot, these can lead to huge problems that are permanent, and they don't deserve to be classified as the enemy of society. They need to be treated differently. uh, if I was a clinical psychologist, that's how I would approach things, because there is therapy available, and it is possible for recovery. It just requires a lot of effort for that to happen. And the support system of the mental health care, like the mental health care institution, again, there's a lot of different ideas as to how to treat people like this, or sociopaths, and which way is supposed to be approached, like through drugs, or through behavioral modification, or through talk therapy or hypnosis, whatever it may be. That's that. And just okay. So let's go back to Phineas Gage here, and we'll read a bit of his story. Okay, so Phineas Gage was an American railroad construction foreman known for his improbable survival of an accident in which a large iron rod was driven completely through his head, destroying much of his brain's left frontal lobe. And for that injury, reported effects on his personality and behavior over the remaining 12 years of his life. Effects sufficiently profound that friends saw him for at least time as no longer Gage. So, if I remember correctly, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for reasoning and also personality. So, if you take a hit to the front of the head, it can completely change you if you're not prepared for it, or if you're not protected. From personally speaking, from racing downhill, I've taken a fall like that, and I've had more than a few concussions from different confrontations, or just injuries. But I've always been wearing a helmet in those cases. You can't be risking this, because it's the brain and the heart are interlinked. Also the stomach. All three of these together are interlinked to each other. And okay. So going on with this. Long known as the American Crowbar case, once termed the case which was more than all others, is calculated to excite our wonder, impair the value of prognosis, and even to subvert our psychological doctrines. Phineas Gage influenced the 19th century discussion about the mind and the brain, particularly debate on cerebral localization. Okay, so the question is, well, what's cerebral localization? Let's have a look. So historical origins and phrenology. Phrenology was this idea in the 19th century. So it says here 1849 that a person's the shape of their head would dictate what kind of person they were and what kind of intelligence capacity that they have. But because it's pretty, it's dubious. And it's well known within with academia that it's dubious, because a skull shape is more dictated by genetics than it is anything else. And that's where you can have issues with traumatic brain injuries and fractures or ruptures of the fluid, the spinal fluid, and the sac for which the brain is in. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about his accident or anything like that, but I want you to figure that out for yourself, to keep you interested. and going further with the pathology, because there's a big difference, and I've seen this a lot when I've been around in the country. There's a lot of judgmental women out there, and I really don't appreciate that. There's a big difference between someone that has autism or is on the spectrum or has any other kind of neurological diversity versus something like this. And there's a lot of autistic men that get singled out and ostracized and eliminated from the gene pool because of that. Because sometimes we're not that smart as a species. We're just not. And what can I say? I don't want to beat up on women, but there's been a hijacking in the society because of dating applications, and the tendency, it basically it rewires a woman's brain as much as it does a man's, through repetition and Pavlov's response with that's the gambling response. So the dopamine every time a bell rings, right? Ding 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 ding. I'm a winner. I'm a winner. I'm a winner. Yeah. So we'll go further on this. Hervey M. Cleric, an American psychologist, influenced the initial diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality reaction disturbance in the DSM of mental disorders, as did American psychologist Greg E. Partridge. The DSM, an international classification of diseases, subsequently introduced the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and dissocial personality disorder, respectively, stating that these diagnoses have been referred to as psychopathy or sociopathy. So the creation of ASPD and DPD were driven by the fact that many of the classic traits of psychopathy were impossible to measure objectively. Canadian, hey, how you doing? Psychologist Robert D. Hare, Robert De Hare, later repopularized the construct of psychopathy in criminology with his psychopathy checklist. Okay, so what's the psychopathy checklist? We'll click on this and we'll talk it through. Okay, it's a psychological assessment tool that is commonly used to assess the presence and extent of the personality trait of psychopathy in individuals, most often often those institutionalized in the criminal justice system, and to differentiate those high in the traits from those with antisocial personalities, APD. A related diagnosable disorder. It is a 20-item inventory of perceivable personality traits and recorded behaviors intended to be completed on the basis of a semi-structured interview along with a review of collateral information such as official records. So, it has to be done by the scientific method. And if you don't know how to use the scientific method and you don't observe, then you don't deserve to assess people on the spot. And your judgmentality is what declares you as a shitty person. I'm saying it right now. Mic drop. So I'm going to correlate to the shirt that I'm wearing in a little bit here, because as a leader, you have to assess people on the spot to see and then observe them to see what they're good at and where they can improve, and how you can tailor fit your treatment of each person to make them better than what they are. Because that's the function of a leader, is to support everyone. It's not to tear them down. There's a big difference between, an actual leader and a micromanager. Okay, so in some cases, micromanaging is okay, but it's on a situation-based assessment. It's not on. It shouldn't be used for an overall rule, an ethic, or rigor or rubric, mentality, something structured, because it doesn't help the individual, especially now, since we have to deal with so many influences, by information and technology. It very much has changed our collective mentality, and the access to information is so readily available that everyone thinks that they're an expert, but this isn't the case. And from personal observation, like I've had the privilege, because of being around the underprivileged, and people who gone through Teen Challenge Farm, and having addictions, and having social issues, having come from poor communities and backgrounds, or terrible circumstances that led them to join gangs, and since they didn't have any support structure, or they didn't have any family, they had no way out. The only thing that they could do was join a gang. And like I'll tell you right now, I've been around murderers. I have, tears on the face. I remember the instance where someone was going through the program, and I asked it what it meant, and they told me, and I was like, huh, okay. And then I can remember when I was a very young child, we used to, my father and my mother, when we were living in Oro, we used to sometimes go to a lawyer's house, and it was, that was in the early 90s. So there's some correlation there to what was in the public sphere. I'm not going to say which or what, because that makes things more interesting for you. You should look it up. Okay, so like murder cases in the early 90s. And I asked him what the difference was between first and second degree murder was. I remember this clearly. Okay. PCLM-R model of psychopathy. So these are okay. Well, actually, let's go. We'll skip this, and we'll go into the items. So, because this is probably the most important part of the whole article. Glibness or superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self-worth. So they have a very large ego, as if you're going to go by Freud. Need for stimulation, proneness to boredom, pathological lying, cunning and manipulative, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, callous or lack of empathy, parasitic lifestyle, poor behavioral controls, promiscuous sexual behavior, early behavior problems, lack of realistic long-term goals, impulsivity, irresponsibility, failure to accept responsibility for their own actions, many short-term marital relationships, juvenile delinquency, revocation of conditional release. So a conditional release is so when someone is either put on parole or something like that, or they're on bail. Feel free to talk about it or correct me, because I don't know everything, but one of my extended family was a parole officer for most of her life, if that's correct. And again, I know one of my uncles was on the Toronto Police Force, and I myself was in cadets. And my parents have direct relationship in the past with Teen Challenge Farm here in London. So what can I say? I've been around every kind of person that I could think of my entire life. And the last one, after item 19, which is a revocation of conditional release, is item 20, so criminal versatility. So I want you to go and look these up and look up the definitions of each of these words, so you understand the connotation. Because there's big differences between, psychopathy or sociopathy and people with autism. Even though they have very similar behaviors, well, in some instances, but on a lot of other cases, they're the exact opposite. Where you can people think that, well, because autistic people can act like chameleons, and they can adopt the personalities of other people, and can learn and mimic superficial charm and so on and so forth. There's an underlying condition of anxiety, because in all instances, the awkward behavior of the individual actually leads to social ostracization or isolation, and that can lead to other behavioral problems. gonna check the battery here. Okay. Okay. So these high PCLR scores. Okay, so this relates where the further in the article it goes further relates to the dark triad of personality traits, which also includes narcissism, and this is the problem with our current society as it is in 2023, and as I would say, since the advent of the smartphone and distribution of the technology in 2007. Where the hijacking of the personality, and basically it's this digital slavery, right? You become part of in association with social networking, social media, and that's why the prevalency has gone through the roof. And then after such stressful events, for which basically burn out people's reward circuits, that's very similar to so what I'm thinking about is psychosis. Okay, so CAMH, this is, the Canadian, this is a Canadian outfit. So psychosis, by their definition, is used to describe a condition that affects the mind in which people have trouble distinguishing between what is real and what is not. And this happens with propaganda, right? The Overton window, for which is presented to you in the media, overloads the person. And then you have very few references, especially when you're socially isolated. And that leads to even further problems where people, they act out in aggression, because isolation leads to loneliness. And loneliness is just as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes every week or every day. It takes years off your life. And it might as well be suicidal. All right, so a number of mental illnesses can include psychosis as a symptom, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, depression with psychotic features, drug-induced psychosis, organ psychosis, brief psychotic disorder, or delusional disorder. And I'll tell you the symptoms here. So they say, psychosis affects the way a person thinks, feels, and behaves. The experience of psychosis varies greatly from person to person. Psychosis can come on suddenly or can develop very gradually. The symptoms of psychosis are often categorized as either positive or negative. So, as by their definitions, positive symptoms are delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, thoughts, or behavior. And then negative symptoms involve normal functioning. I would say normal functions becoming lost or reduced. They may include restricted emotional and facial expression, restricted speech and verbal fluency, difficulty with generating ideas or thoughts, reduced ability to begin tasks, reduced socialization and motivation. And then it goes further. Other symptoms may include cognitive symptoms such as difficulties with attention, concentration, and memory, mood changes, suicidal thoughts or behaviors, substance abuse, and sleep disturbances. So this is where a lot of these issues, these mental conditions, they overlap with each other, and hence why I said before, if you don't have experience, around these people, or if you don't have training, then stop the judgment. Honestly, we can't. We got to stop the judgment. I would say this post-COVID psychosis that was induced by the propaganda, and then the fear subroutine, as I'll put it, or fear reinforcement, which was a learned thing from previous eras in the era of terror, from George Bush, 9/11 onwards through Obama and so forth. because again, and then it was as distributed by the 24-hour news cycle, and then social media, and compounding issues, absolutely compounding, in order to undermine critical reasoning skills and individual identity, right? So this is where further issues evolved out of this questioning of identity, where okay, so this gay washing starts happening, and okay, so yeah, no problem, have some more visibility, have some more acceptance in the society. But the thing is that when we become too tolerant of these behaviors, we allow people who don't recognize the fact that they have psychosis, or that they have psychopathic tendencies, to run amok. Then it's a real problem, right? We have to be more compassionate to these conditions, but not at the price of ourselves, right? We can't allow slavery to happen just because someone says that I'm going to give you everything that you want. And that's actually the worst thing, is that when someone approaches you and says, okay, I'll give you whatever you want, right? I'll make your dreams come true, and so on and so forth. That's a sign that you're going to get hijacked, because life isn't like that. Life is not fair. Life and society doesn't care about you in the modern day, because the degree of public trust, or as the older generations call it, they call it common sense, has been degraded by these circuits that have been overclocked, so to speak, and overloaded to the degree that we can't function as individuals. And okay, so that increases cortisol levels, and decreases our ability to think for ourselves and to treat each other as human beings. Because as so many people, as I've highlighted in other videos, the suicide rate was absolutely deplorable. And when it comes to that point where you're burned out, it's the same as a traumatic brain injury with Phineas Gage. It will absolutely change your personality. The stress level puts you into a psychotic state, or a state of psychosis. And that's the thing, is they're talking about sleep disturbances. So the military trains people to deal with this, and to learn discipline. And same with cadets. Okay, cadets will teach you discipline. Teach you a lot of different skills. Same with the Scouts and Cubs and the Beavers. And there's no more Brownies, unfortunately. What can I say? Culture changes. Not always for the better. Let's be honest. Not every change is a good one. Okay. So anyways, with the sleep deprivation comes hallucinations, and that usually happens after about, I would say, like 24 hours, or any sustained period of work over 10 hours. Because your body is completely burned out, and it doesn't have any more serotonin. You're completely drained. The good example of someone who talks about this would be Scheisse. Andrew Huberman. He's on YouTube here, and then I'm like, okay, so YouTube. And then for narcissism, I would reference, she's very popular. She has a good channel. Dr. Ramani. I've learned a lot from her. So what can I say? Thank you. Ann Huberman, and Peterson, and Carl Jung, but also from a lot of philosophy and art, and watching a copious amount of movies. There's a lot of differences, as I've said before, between the psychopathy and people on the autistic spectrum. And one of the main differences that I can tell you, besides the charismatic aspect, and then so there's the anxiety response, which some people thrive on, is speech patterns. And then the other one is the eyes, right? So if you want to understand if someone has a lot going on in their mind, the stress level will show like this. right? The eye will droop. And that's a sign of fatigue, right? Like that. Whereas psychopathy is like this. Like the aggression is through the roof. You gotta do something to you. Right? Rage, and that's usually what follows the two. So narcissistic rage is like that, or there's any kind of injury to the person's mentality or psyche and their self-evaluation. And I'm gonna leave it at here because it's 30 minutes and it's a lot of information for 30 minutes. So happy hunting and have some good fun, like I do, learning all of this information, because that's what it should be. Learning should be fun, and we'll see you next time.